Well, it's official. The Corvette is officially a hypercar. On June 25th, 2024, the new C8 Corvette ZR1 was revealed to the world, and this car is a ripper. And before you ask, no, I have not driven this car, but as of today, neither has anyone else on the internet because technically the car is not finished yet. But what Chevy did the other day is confirm the rumors and speculation that have been swirling around for years now. And there is certainly a lot to talk about here. Like, it's 4-digit horsepower or what will likely be a $200,000 plus price tag. But before we dive into that, let's just kind of talk about how we got here. Something that I really want to emphasize is just how much the Corvette has changed with the C8 generation. Historically, I think the Corvette has kind of straddled the line a little bit in terms of being both a sports car and a supercar. But with the C8 ZR1, it has blown way past that, and the Corvette is now in hypercar territory. And from the jump, we knew that GM was going to be very aspirational with the C8. For one, it's where they finally made the leap and went mid-engine with the Corvette, which just kind of opens the door for even higher levels of performance. It's also the first Corvette to only be available with a dual clutch automatic transmission, which might be disappointing to some, but it does align the Corvette with the supercar market more broadly. But even with these massive changes, the base model Stingray Corvette still uses the LT2 engine, which is a pushrod V8 design that evolved from their prior generation of LS engines, which was an evolution of kind of the small block V8 that Chevy has been producing since legitimately like the 1950s. And while I am a fan of GM's LS and LT engines, it's certainly not the powertrain that comes to mind when I'm thinking of an exotic supercar, which is why I am kind of personally a little hesitant to label the base model Stingray as a true supercar. But the Z06, on the other hand, certainly is a real supercar, and primarily because of its powertrain. The C8 Z06 uses the LT6 engine, which is a brand new V8 that GM developed just for the Corvette, which is incredibly exciting during this time of like everything becoming electric. Now, technically, GM has been producing this V8 engine for use in Corvette race cars for a couple of years now, but it's still incredibly impressive that they decided to certify this engine for road use. And the other impressive thing is that this LT6 engine is a radical departure from what GM is known for. I had mentioned GM has been working on perfecting the pushrod V8 for like the last 70 years, but this new LT6 uses a completely different design. Now, I'm not going to get too bogged down in some of the technicalities, but the LT2 engine that you would find in a base model Stingray really isn't all that dissimilar from the engine that you would find in a GM pickup truck. While the LT6, on the other hand, with its flat plane crank and dual overhead cams, is much more similar to the type of engine you would find in a vehicle like a Ferrari. And with that LT6 making 670 horsepower, it is the most powerful naturally aspirated V8 ever put in a road car. So with just how impressive the Z06 is, we knew that the ZR1 was going to be special. And there's been rumors swirling around for the past few years that GM has been working on two different trims that will sit above the Z06. The traditional ZR1 that GM has produced for the last few generations of the Corvette, but then another model, what we think will be called the Zora, that will even sit above the ZR1. And included in this speculation were a few different powertrain options that these cars might feature. Mainly that both of these trims, the ZR1 and the Zora, would feature a twin turbocharged version of the LT6 engine from the Z06, and the Zora would potentially be getting a hybrid assist from the E-Ray. But we are no longer speculating because GM has officially revealed the ZR1. And I want to talk about kind of my initial reaction to seeing this car. The first thing that I saw was a headline announcing that the new ZR1 is going to make 1,064 horsepower. And that number is just so ridiculous that I assumed we had to be wrong about what we thought the ZR1 was going to be, that it must have had that hybrid assist from the E-Ray in conjunction with the twin-turbo V8. What I had been thinking is that the ZR1 would have somewhere in the neighborhood of 800, maybe 850 horsepower, which would still be incredibly impressive and give it a leg up on other supercars like the McLaren 750S. But I was absolutely wrong about this, and I am not mad in the slightest. And the first video that I watched about this car was from Jacob and Yuri of Straight Pipes, and shout out to them. I love the content they produce. But the entire time while I was watching the video, I was listening to hear how they incorporated that hybrid technology into the ZR1. But then I heard those magic words that all 1,064 horsepower that this car is producing is solely coming from the internal combustion engine.
Again, this is only rear-wheel drive, no hybrid assist, normal turbos.
Which is absolutely insane. So where those rumors ended up being true was that the ZR1 did indeed use a twin turbocharged version of the LT6, and from here forward, we will refer to that powertrain as the LT7. And quick sidebar, but GM desperately needs help to market their cars more effectively. The other American car companies have these kind of cool and iconic names for their engines. Like Ford has the Coyote, the Voodoo, and the Predator motor. And Dodge had the Hellcat and the Demon. And now GM produces their most powerful engine of all time by a long shot, and they just call it the LT7, which I think is a massive missed opportunity. But back to the topic at hand, building the LT7, of course, it isn't as simple as just slapping a couple of turbos onto the LT6. There are a lot of internal components that have to be beefed up, as well as lowering this engine's compression ratio to accommodate the 20 PSI of boost that is now being forced in. And when we look around the rest of the supercar market, the ZR1 is now going to be in a league of its own. You look at competitors like the McLaren 750S, and the ZR1 is up over 250 horsepower. You look at vehicles like the Lamborghini Revuelto or the Ferrari SF90 that might have a comparable total power figure, but they accomplish that through adding in an electric motor. And not to mention that those cars are easily 2 or 3 times the price of whatever the ZR1 ends up being. You really have to make the jump to something like a Koenigsegg or a Bugatti to see this level of power just coming from a gas engine. And those cars, they really exist in their own universe. They are so meticulously produced and built in ultra low quantities. And GM will be producing the ZR1 in good old Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is the same factory that also produces the base model Stingray that you could go and pick up at a rental lot for $200 a day. The ZR1 is really like the working man's hypercar. So of course, beyond just the engine, there are a lot of other enhancements that are made to the ZR1 to differentiate it from the Z06. And a lot of that is just focused around aero. Maybe most notably, the ZR1 will not feature a front trunk and instead will have a flow-through hood that helps provide more downforce and enhanced cooling. And of course, with all of this extra power, the ZR1 is going to need to feature some very large brakes. And lastly, there's a nice little kind of throwback touch on the rear end of this car where it features the split window design, kind of harkening back to the C2 Corvette that covers up the engine bay. So this car still is months away from starting production. So there hasn't been an opportunity for kind of any independent test to be conducted yet. But my guess is that when this car finally does come out, it will be breaking production car lap records at every racetrack that it visits. The Z06 is already an incredibly fast car, and I don't think 400 extra horsepower and a bunch of additional aero is going to slow it down. But there are still some things that we don't know about this car yet, with one of the biggest questions being price. The Z06 currently starts around $115,000, so I would expect the ZR1 to be significantly more expensive. My guess is that they will want this car to have a base price under $200,000, so maybe it'll start in like the mid-80s, but I have to imagine that with some of the performance packages that are going to be available for this car, it is going to easily crest the $200,000 mark. But we should have a more definitive idea on pricing when this car gets a little bit closer to production, most likely sometime in early 2025. And of course, this is going to be an extremely sought after car, so you can certainly expect that dealers will be marking them up and people will be flipping them any opportunity that they get. So all in all, I am incredibly excited for this new ZR1. I do believe that it is starting to put the Corvette, it's kind of edging into hypercar territory. But even if you don't think that the ZR1 is a real hypercar yet, when the Zora comes out and it's the same powertrain with electric motors up front and it's making like 1400 horsepower, I really don't think you're going to have much of an argument against the Corvette being a hypercar then.